talk about trademark defenses, and in particular, the so-called fair use defenses of descriptive and nominative fair use. So the first thing you should know is what these are defenses to. They are defenses to both trademark infringement and federal trademark dilution. So both federal trademark infringement and federal trademark dilution have these defenses. Although the statute isn't written very clearly, that is in fact true. Now, even before we get into the defenses, you should be thinking about whether or not you actually need to analyze them. Why might you not? Well, think about if you said that you'd be there in a jiffy. Have you violated the trademark of Jiffy, the corn muffin mix, or Jiffy as part of Jiffy Lube? I don't think so, because as you know, probably, trademark infringement requires use of the mark on goods and services used in commerce. And just simply saying that you'll be somewhere in a jiffy doesn't involve any goods or services. Similarly, what if you see a news company say the Cubs have hired so-and-so? Is that an issue of trademark infringement? Well, the Cubs is definitely a trademark, and even if this is used by a news company such as commercial, probably no one is going to be confused and thinking that the Cubs have actually sponsored the news such that there is infringement. And similarly, there isn't actually federal dilution because the statute very clearly spells out an exception for news reporting. So the statute's not so helpful in terms of infringement for news reporting, but the same thing would apply in that if you're not using the mark on goods and services in commerce such that there's confusion, no problem. Now, let's talk about descriptive fair use, which is sometimes called classic fair use. Basically, what this means is you're using the mark as ordinary language, not as your own mark to identify your goods and services. So let me give you an example. Sweet Tarts is a trademark. Now, if you had a company and you said in your advertisement, our candy is sweet and tart, that is very similar, but it's actually okay under the descriptive fair use. Why? Because you're using the words sweet and tart as ordinary language, not to reference that brand name. Now, what if there might be consumer confusion? Well, actually, that's fine. The Supreme Court has said even if some consumers might be confused, because the mark owner chose a mark that is descriptive in part, then that's the risk they face, that some consumers will be confused. If they want to avoid that, they should have chose a suggestive, fanciful, or arbitrary mark. Now, the trickier kind of fair use is nominative fair use. So this is when you're using a mark to actually refer to the mark owner. So for example, if you say, we fix Apple computers, and you are not Apple computers, you're a store, maybe you're Best Buy, you say, we fix Apple computers, but you're trying to use the word Apple, which belongs to the computer company, to indicate to customers what you service. Now, when is it not applicable? Well, one situation where it's not applicable is if you're using something that is the mark or very similar to it to refer to your own goods and services. So if you use something that's a variation of the mark on goods and services, so if you call yourself South Face instead of North Face for your store, that is not nominative fair use. Now, assuming you do have a real example of nominative fair use, like we fix Apple computers, how do you evaluate it? Well, basically, there are three factors, and you need to show why all of them establish your use is fair. The first is that it's hard to explain to people what's going on without using the mark. So if you want to tell people you fix Apple computers without using the word Apple, that could get kind of confusing. You could say, well, we fix computers that are very popular that are not made by IBM, but that's very, very clunky. The second is you're not using more than necessary. Now, this often could be a situation of whether or not you use a logo. So if you only say the word Apple and you don't use its logo, then that's more likely to be fair use. You haven't taken more than necessary. But once you use the logo, people might be more likely to be thinking that you have been officially endorsed or sponsored. And the third factor is anything that suggests that you are officially associated or sponsored by the company. So if you simply say we fix Apple computers, there's nothing to indicate that you are associated. So all three of these factors are all required to be evaluated. But there's more. Now, these factors can either replace the likelihood of confusion factors in the Ninth Circuit, or in other circuits, you still evaluate the regular confusion factors, but if there is likely confusion, then the burden shifts to the defendant to show why it is fair and thus there is no liability. Now, one last issue is that for the third factor, there's two ways to evaluate it depending on what circuit you're in. The Ninth Circuit says as long as you don't affirmatively suggest association, you're off the hook. Whereas a Third Circuit says, well, actually, it's not good enough just to not affirmatively make claims if your conduct still suggests some kind of affiliation, then that's not good enough. So in other words, a Ninth Circuit is an easier one to meet as long as you don't officially say anything that suggests association, you're off the hook. Whereas in the harder Third Circuit, they're taking an overall big picture look at everything to make sure there's no improper suggestion of association. So hopefully that helps give you a better understanding of fair uses.